Hey everybody, this is Davis with Hardin County Conservation. We're going to take you out on the ice today and do a little intro to ice fishing video for families and kids, especially those participating in our youth fishing photo contest. We're going to talk to you about shacks, drilling holes, augers, jigging techniques, all sorts of really cool stuff. So hope you hit the water with us here, and let's go ahead and get rolling. Alright, so we're going to drill a hole here. I'm going to use a power auger instead of a hand auger. So a couple of options that you have. A hand auger is just a tool that's going to look like this at the bottom, but it's got a big two-handle grip at the top, and you turn it to rotate it to drill your hole. But with this one, all I have to do is pretty much pull this cord, hit my start button, and it should pull right away. So I'm going to pull the cord really hard. It's going to kickstart the motor. I'm going to drill my hole, and then we're going to show you how to clear a hole too. But this is gas powered. It takes a mixed fuel, so it's a gasoline and oil mix. It does have a primer bulb, just like you'd see on a chainsaw and other power tools, so it works just the same. Hit your primer bulb and it pushes some fuel and some oil into the line, and then it kind of helps it get kick-started. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this, and hopefully we get a start on the first pull because I just used it. So now I'm going to drill straight down. Then I just flick that off. And one thing you want to do when you run your auger to keep your hole from getting too slushed up is you want to keep drilling all the way through and drill on your way out so it spins all the ice up out of the hole. And then all we're going to do is kick this slush that's around our hole out. And then we need to do some scooping. So I'm going to take kind of a metal ladle with some holes in it that does our scooping here. I'm just going to dip it in there, pull some of that ice and slush out. And that is a perfectly ready to fish hole. You could drop a line in there right now. And we will do that here in just a second.
So the type of shack that I brought here today is what we call a pop-up tent. So it comes in this kind of big duffel bag. And they look a little daunting at first to set up, but they made them pretty easy. So you always start by lifting the roof up first. So I don't know if you can see that they'll have a pull handle right there. And so I'm just going to reach in, grab that loop, and then what you want to do is brace. Let me turn so you can see. Brace your hand on the top and pull. Now my roof is set up. Now all you have to do is go around each of the four sides and do the same thing. Grab the handle and pull. And as long as you use that other hand to brace the top, you've got some resistance there. One last side. And there you have it, a fully set up, insulated ice house. Keep you nice and warm for your fishing. I'll just pick that up and carefully walk over the hole. Make sure you don't step in your hole as you're getting set up. But yeah, that'll keep you nice and warm. Okay, so what I'm using right now as far as a rod is called a schoolie rod. It's kind of the old school, tried and true ice fishing rod. They've been around forever. Your dads and grandpas you've probably seen them in a bucket in the garage. They're very economical. You can usually pick these guys up for about 12 bucks at any of your farm and home stores. I like them. They've got a built-in rod stand here, and what's unique about these over some of the rods, ice fishing rods that'll look a little bit more just like a small open water spinning reel, is that they have these plastic reels. And a lot of times in shallow water, what I'll do if I catch a fish, instead of reeling it up, I'll just pick it up and hand line it in like this, which makes it nice and simple. There's not many moving parts on them. They do have a drag where you can adjust the tension on how much line can get pulled out, or how much tension it takes to pull a line out. And what I really like these for beginners is the spring bobber that's at the end. So when I'm jigging, I move that up and down, and you can see how that spring bobber reacts. Now, if a fish were to come up and bite and pull on this line, that spring bobber goes down, and a lot of times you can even hear the metal clicking. So it's really visual. It's really easy to see. You don't have to feel anything. You don't have to worry about how sensitive the rod is, or buy a real expensive ice rod that has a lot of sensitivity. These metal springs can be adjusted. So if I pull this out, I can pull it out, which makes it harder for the spring to go down. So if say I'm using a heavier jig, you might want to bend that up a little bit. Or if you're using a real light jig, you can pull it down so it's a little flatter and a little more sensitive. But yeah, like I said, for somebody getting into ice fishing, they're a great beginner rod. In fact, they're one of my go-to ice fishing rods. I use them a lot, and you just can't go wrong. Plus they're real tough fiberglass. They're hard to break, and if you happen to leave one at the lake or run over one in your truck, you're out about 10-15 bucks. You can just go get another one.
Caught it?
Oh, you got one?
You got one?
All right, good job. This is a perch. You caught a perch. Look at that. That's on a jigging spoon. A little jigging spoon with a treble hook. Let's see if I can get it out here without my pliers. Yeah. So there you go. It's chartreuse on the back side, and then it's got a little bit of orange and green on the front. And that's a little bit of yeah, very good. A little bit of flake there. So with these on the treble hook, we're using minnows, and we'll just put one minnow on one of the treble hooks. We've also been using wax worms and some mealworms, which have been doing okay as well. Okay, you want to let them go? All right.
There he goes.
He goes. Good job.
All right. Talk to you a little bit about some different rods and reels that we can use. I'll talk a little bit about, perch versus walleye rods, and maybe the difference between a pike rod and a walleye rod. So here in my hand, I have two what we would consider to be panfish rods. One of them is this guy here, which is it's a relatively short, relatively stiff fishing rod that I often use for like jigging spoons, something that I don't need much sensitivity for. It's got a jig head on it right now because I will use it to use as a dead stick, so we'll call it a dead stick if we set it in the rod holder and maybe fish a live minnow on it. But what's interesting about this setup is if you look at the reel, so the reel is what we call an inline reel. And it's kind of new to the ice fishing world, but if you fly fish at all, and I do fly fish, these are pretty common in the fly fishing world. So it's kind of been something that's been derived from the fly game, and it's been used for kind of this situation we have here where we're vertical jigging. Especially in shallow water, they work great because you don't have to let a ton of line out, but they work just like a button caster would. You click this button here, it's going to let the line out, and you let the weight of the jig do the work. So that is our inline reel, and actually I see that we do have the fish on, so I'm gonna land this guy before he gets me too tangled. So again, you can reel, but you don't have to. That one I just brought up by hand, but we have a little, if I can get a hold of him. They do have a lot of spikes, but we have a little yellow perch there. There's lots of these small ones in this lake, but minnows are what we're using for live bait. And I'll talk about the rod I just caught that fish on, actually. So this is gonna look a little bit more familiar to most people. If we look at the reel, this is your conventional spinning reel that you would use in open water situations. Small reel too. You want to have when you're pan fishing, you want to have a smaller reel with light line on it, so 2 to 3 pound test line. And really the only thing that changes from open water to the ice fishing is the rod itself. So the reel kind of stays the same. But we have again a relatively short rod here. This is an ultralight power rod, so super sensitive. Chris showed you on the schoolie poles. The end of the rod has a spring bobber. This one is a little bit different, where it's just different colored. So we have a bright green color, and it's got some extra sensitivity to it. So if we see that barely pull on the line there, it's gonna have a lot of action in the end of the rod. So it works great as a jigging rod if I'm dropping small tungsten jigs, even small spoons, or if I use it as a dead stick like that one was sitting just right in the rod holder there. That works fine. So those are kind of what I like to use for my pan fishing, either an inline reel or one of those smaller ultralight rods. And I do have one set up here. This is a pike rod. I don't have a walleye rod set up right now, but I'll show you a bit of the difference. So I'm going to tighten this drag down just in case. I'm going to reel up my bait for you. So I have a much bigger reel on this setup. This is a medium power rod, and this is going to have 20 pound braided line on it, so much heavier compared to, you know, something like this. Reel's much smaller, line is much lighter. Rods are about the same length. I'm not too concerned about rod length when it comes to you know, dead sticking a live bait for something like a pike or a walleye. So I just want to be sure that it's got a lot of power to it and a lot of line and some pretty good drag. So if I hook a big fish in shallow water and I need to get him out of structure, I can't even pull that line out because I can lock that drag so hard. So a good reel is very important for your ice fishing. You could definitely use this as a dead stick rod for walleyes too, because it is a medium power rod. You would just want to change what you have for a reel. So the balance is a little bit off on this. It's meant for heavier fish right now, but we'd want to downsize our reel to accommodate that better. And then, just for the purpose of having it here, what I use for if I'm ice fishing for pike or walleyes, even muskies if you get lucky enough, we like to use live or dead suckers. And it's got kind of a complicated little rig to it, and I'm tangled up with my other line here, but we use tandem treble hooks. So this is just a rig that I tied myself if you want to target, you know, catfish or pike or things like that. So treble hook in the front, treble hook in the back. I just hook them through the nose and then kind of through the midsection. Then I have 60-pound fluorocarbon connected to my super heavy braid. So that's just what I use for dead stick pike rig. Works great nonetheless, but that's kind of what we're looking at as far as basic gear. And this stuff you don't have to spend a ton of money on. You know, they go anywhere from, you can find a combo from maybe $15 all the way up to a couple hundred, depending on what you're wanting to spend your money on. So for a beginner, if you guys go into Tyson's, Walmart, Fleet Farm, any of those places, your local sporting goods stores, you can find these for relatively cheap, and a lot of them come preloaded with light line, so it works just fine that way. We're going to talk live bait a little bit here. So one of the important things that you should always have with you when you're ice fishing is some sort of live bait. The first one I'm going to start with is one that I've mentioned already, which is a spike or a maggot. And these come in a variety of colors. So these are red. I like the red ones a lot because they kind of look like an aquatic worm larvae. So they'll imitate things like chironomids, yeah, midges, all sorts of stuff like that. So these work great as a good natural bait. That red color is present in the water naturally, so I tip those on jig heads and spoons and things. It's a great live bait, kind of my all-around go-to for panfish, whether that be perch or crappies or bluegills. That's always a bait that I like to have on the water. Next one I'm going to talk about, this is going to be for your little bit larger panfish. These work really well for perch, but I'm going to bring one to the top so you can see them. But these are mealworms. You can buy them again at pretty much any farm and fleet store. A lot of the bait shops sell them. But this is a much bigger meal. So if you're wanting to target, you know, some real jumbo bluegills or some large perch, even largemouth bass, these work great for all of those. And they do hang on to the hook pretty well too with that hard exoskeleton. You just kind of hook them in the head and they do their thing naturally. So you can do mealworms, you can do spikes like I mentioned. One of the other things you may consider is in this other bait puck here, and these are going to be wax worms. So this is probably the most common bait that we have in all of our bait shops. They're just these little soft-bodied macroinvertebrates, but they're really squishy. The one downside to these, they don't stay on the hook super well. They rip and tear pretty easy, so if you fish for bluegills or things that like to tail bite a lot, these maybe aren't the best choice. But nonetheless, that's an all-around bait, awfully tough to beat. And then the one that I don't have in front of me right now that I will mention, one you'll want to have with you is minnows. So if I'm fishing crappies, walleyes, perch, that is an essential bait you have to have. You'll want to match your minnow to the fish you're catching. So for yellow perch, I like a little bit smaller minnow. Crappies, small to medium-sized minnows, and then you get into your walleyes and you'll want some large-sized minnows. So when you go into the bait shop, lots of times they'll have those separated already into small and medium-large categories. So whatever you're catching, base your minnow size off of that. So smaller fish, you want a smaller minnow. Bigger fish, you want a bigger minnow. So the first lure I'm going to show you here in the water, this is what we call a T-rip. It's kind of a simulation of a bait fish that's sitting parallel in the water, so kind of in its normal form. And then I've just tipped it with some little red spikes there, or what we call maggots. And I'm going to show you the action in the water here. So this is a T-rip. You can find these at a lot of shops. It's become a pretty popular bait, but they work great for panfish, perch, all sorts of stuff. If I drop this in the water, so I'm barely moving my hand here, but what I want this bait to do is just kind of sit there and shake. So you'll see the spikes off the back that are just kind of jiggling like crazy. I can give it a little bit more action, make the whole lure kind of hop up and down, but even just wiggling my hand gives those spikes a lot of action, and that bait on the front makes that look really fantastic in the water. And I've caught quite a few perch on this exact setup today. So if you want to jig in relatively clear water, this is a great bait to use. Again, it's called a T-rip. Got another couple baits I'm going to show you here. So I'm going to take this one out of the water and just kind of leave it. This is going to be more of your traditional, what we would call like a fluttering spoon. Just show you, it's got a couple different colors on it. This is not one that I would use for panfish. It would be a great spoon for largemouth bass, smallmouth bass. You could definitely catch pike on it. Great walleye bait too. So this one I'm going to show you it's got quite a bit different action than the T-rip I just showed you. But those feathers on the back add a lot to that bait. So if I just kind of hop it and let it flutter, it does sink pretty fast, even though it is, you know, kind of paper clip like in shape. But it's got some great action. Looks like a big dying bait fish, and is great for what we call a reaction strike. So the spoon sits in front of their face. It flies past them, the fish react to it and just kind of grab a hold of it. So with this, I would put either a minnow head or a sucker head on the back of it, and it works great for you know, catching walleyes and stuff in shallow to deep water. Can work for either. So again, that's just your kind of your traditional fluttering spoon. You can look at Little Cleos, Castmasters, lots of other things that are going to be more your traditional, you know, fluttering style spoons. And then the last one I'm going to show you, this is just a basic tungsten jig, but one of my favorites, especially in relatively dirty water or clear water. This is just a gold clam tungsten jig. You can put plastics on it. You can put minnows on them. So we hook our minnows in the backs on these today, and that's kind of what's catching our fish. You can also put wax worms or spikes on them. They work for about anything. I've caught everything from walleyes to perch to all sorts of panfish on them. So I'll just show you the action of these in the water. It's pretty basic. You'll notice there's not much to it. Just adds a little bit of color and some weight to get that bait down. One nice thing about these jigs, the way they present in the water, because the way that the eye of the hook is shaped, they do sit level. So if you put a minnow on there, it's going to sit level while that minnow's on there, so it looks very, very natural in the water. And they make these in dozens of different colors, but this is just your generic tungsten ice jig.
So what we're looking at here is a ice flasher. This is a unit that's kind of convertible. It can be used on a boat or through the ice. It's set up like a traditional flasher, so it may look kind of confusing at first. You see all these little lines blinking in different colors and not sure what you're looking at. So this will be pretty much consistent with all flashers. There'll be some sort of a dial, whether it's on an LCD screen like this or the more traditional flasher screens that actually have a light that rotates around. But they'll look like this with usually about 3 colors. So starting up here at the 0, you'll see a little yellow block. That's actually the ice. And when you come down here, you're going to follow this all the way around. So that is 2 feet, that's 4 feet. And then when you get down to the bottom where you see this kind of red and blue line, that's actually the bottom. So, which is at, it says, this one says 4.7, 4.8 feet. Everything beyond that bottom back up to 0 is just kind of feedback. It doesn't really tell you anything. The color of the bottom can tell you a little bit what you're looking at. If it's depends on the unit, but if it's a solid red, that means it's a hard bottom. It can be gravel, sand, rock, excuse me, or anything of a harder density. If it's yellow or blue, that can be silt or vegetation, where you see the blue, just a real light blue line just above the red. We know we have a little bit of aquatic vegetation that's died off and is laying on top of the bottom, so that's what we're seeing there. If there was structure in there, like say a tree branch or something, you're going to get a solid line, sort of like you see just below the 4-foot line here, but it'll probably be brighter and denser. It's usually bright red. You can tell a tree branch from a fish or something else because it won't move at all. It won't kind of blink back and forth. And so those are good things to look at when you're looking for a place to go fishing. Sometimes you want to be right in the structure, fishing right through the brush. Sometimes you want to be just to the side of it. So those are all things that we can tell from the depth finder. So there we have, what we're focused on now is what we call the transducer, and that's hooked to a little float, and that just floats in your hole. That's actually what's sending a sonar signal down to the bottom, some waves, and it detects those waves coming back, real ultrasonic sound waves. So if I did catch a fish, I can quick pull it up like that and move it out of the way. Otherwise it'll just sit there and float. Now, we looked at this line here before. It's kind of blue and red. That's actually my jig. So when I pick my rod up, I'll see it moving. Now, if there's a fish on there, we can see if we can coax one over. But they'll start off, see, now you see one that just came up off the bottom or is nearby. These blue lines here indicate that there's probably a fish nearby, and as they come closer, the blue line will get thicker and it'll turn red or yellow. And what you hope to see is that blue line come up to the line where your jig is, like what's happening right now. So he's kind of coming up, taking a look at it, isn't too interested in biting right now. One of the things you can do to try to coax him into biting is jig just a little bit, which jigging just means moving your tip of your rod up and down, and then then we can pause, and sometimes that pause after a jig will coax them into going after it and doing a full bite.
All right, so I'm gonna drop this bait all the way down to the bottom. We like to start from the bottom up when we're ice fishing. And I'm just gonna reel up a little bit. And this is that T-rip. So I'm just gonna sit here and I'm just gonna kind of shake this bait. And there's a fish right there. Oh, we have a nice perch, good deal. Not a huge one. And they do get wrapped up in the transducer from time to time. We'll just unwrap him. Drop that back in there. But this is that T-rip. It comes with 2 different hook options. This one I left the treble hook on. I kind of wish I wouldn't have because they're tough to get out. But just use a pair of hemostats. That's something you should always carry with you. And there's your perch. So again, we want to start down at the bottom when we retrieve. So it's a drop down to the substrate. In this case, we're dropping down to some aquatic vegetation. We're gonna wait until our line stops. So it's stopped there. I'm gonna reel up just a little bit, and I'm gonna sit there and kind of work that T-rip up off the bottom just a little bit. And I'm not seeing that I'm marking any fish this time, so we may not get bit here, but it's always worth trying. So let's see, maybe we can pull one up off the bottom here. So Chris showed you on his flasher. We're working from the bottom up, just like that. Let's see if we can keep this one out of the deucer. And there's another nice little yellow perch. So that bottom up technique really does work. You want to bring that lure slowly up to the surface, and I think part of the reason that is such a successful technique is because when these perch are down in the grass and stuff and they're milling around, when you bring that lure up out of there, it looks like something they've stirred up from the bottom, and it's kind of slowly working its way up, and they want to eat it before it gets too high above their head. Otherwise it gets too high in the water column and they can't really grab a hold of it very well. So that's a great technique for targeting these perch through the ice is to work from the bottom up. And the other thing you'll want to do is cover the entire water column. So if I don't get bit right at the bottom, I'm going to continue to work my way up in the water column until I do get bit. So I just raised a fish there. I can see that on my flasher, which is why these are important to have. I'm just going to slowly work my way up. And I'm not seeing that I'm marking anything now, so I might have picked off the 2 real active ones that I had in here. And one thing, not just perch do, but fish do even under the ice is they move a lot. So we run into lots of schools. They'll just kind of come in. I had 2 quick bites there, a little flurry. They'll move out, and then I'll, maybe 5-10 minutes later, I might get 4 or 5 more fish, and then they're gone. So we do see them moving in groups a lot, but I'm just going to reel in, and we're going to kind of wait for the next school to come in. So there you go. So hopefully that is enough on the water talk to get you guys up and going for ice fishing season. We covered everything from electronics to augers to jigging to bait to basically anything you need to get yourself started on the ice. So now the next step is for you guys to go out, get all your necessary gear, take your kids out fishing, and just enjoy being on the water. Thank you for watching this video. Again, I'm Davis from Hardin County Conservation. If you guys are interested in our youth fishing photo contest, you can go online to our website, www.hardincountyconservation.com, or you can go to any of our social media pages, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Hardin County Conservation is all you need to look up, and you should be able to find those things. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed.